Like most families, I'm sure you have a pet at home, whether that be a dog, cat, fish, or even a bird. And these pets, we consider them family. I myself have a dog and 2 cats, and I love them all dearly. Now imagine taking your pet and having them being taken to undergo experimental testing for cosmetic purposes. Now these tests involve being shaved and rubbed down with chemicals into their skin to view irritation, as well as having chemicals dropped into their eyes to also view irritation. As well, having chemicals injected into them to view lethal dosages. Now, if we wouldn't let our own pets go through this type of violence and pain and horror, then why must millions of other animals do so for our own cosmetic benefits? As an activist and modern age student, I believe it is important to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Like many, thinking of my own pet, knowing nothing outside of a laboratory and cage, pains me. Looking even at a story called A Dog's Tale by Mark Twain. It's about a dog who lives with a family of scientists. The dog goes on to save the family's baby from a fire and later watches the dog's own puppies be blinded and killed through experiments done by the scientists. This is from a 2013 article by Gale Research titled Research Animals. These articles and such experiments should lead us to an understanding that animal testing in cosmetics should be banned within the US. Though this only scathes an emotional bias of animal testing, there is an abundance of scientific research to back up the cruel and violent acts involving animal testing. The main point I want to consider when discussing this topic is the abundance of current alternative methods. With so many scientific advancements, it is important to note the abundance of alternative methods within animal testing. However, with the advancements in medical technology, the amount of animals used for research has also gone up. This is from an article on the alternative methods of animal testing by Sonal Ladoki and Shishikant Diwali in 2013. Now, you would be led to believe that with modern advancements, the need for animal testing would decrease. However, the opposite has happened. Many of these animals are euthanized in order to use their organs and tissues to undergo testing. These acts are abusive and unnecessary, as it is argued that while the animals are alive, they have rights against pain and distress. This comes from the same article by Doke and Diwali. Similarly, from an article from PETA on alternative by animal testing, there's a list of alternative options to testing, especially for cosmetic purposes. These alternatives include in vitro testing, computer models, and even human volunteers. Now, let's understand what each of these tests entail. In vitro testing is the ability to use stem cells and human tissues to test these chemicals, as well as organ chips and even human blood cells. Now, for computer models, there is something called the QSAR, which is a technology created to provide a method to test toxicity of chemicals, and it is a low-cost and effective method of testing these chemicals, especially for cosmetic purposes. This comes from a 2023 article by Savannah Sherman on the alternatives to animal testing. And these are just a few of the mass amount of alternatives we currently have available to us in modern day to use. Now, these are just some advancements that allow us to abolish animal testing, and we can also look at the impact we as people can make to further this abolish. Over the years, companies have began to make the switch to cruelty-free. However, we know that many companies are considered cruelty-free in the US, but import to China, which requires animal testing. So this makes it very important to do your own research when shopping for cruelty-free and find cosmetic products that are truly cruelty-free. From a 2023 article by Savannah Sherman, The Future of Cruelty-Free Beauty in Florida, it is said that organizations such as Leaping Bunny and People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, have created a cruelty-free certification that are completely reliable and worthy of being trusted. So it is important to start shopping from brands that follow these guidelines if we wish to make an actual impact. Not only is boycotting brands that do not follow these guidelines or regulations a large part of banning animal testing, but there has been many protests that have brought animal testing to the public eye and to the government. For example, from an article by Gale Research called Research Animals, it is said that in 2004, protesters vandalized and set free multiple research animals from the University of Iowa. However, violent acts such as these are uncommon with animal rights activists. They usually tend to lead to political protests in order to ban animal testing and bring forth bills to do so. Even PETA has been involved in undercover media attention, bringing forth the awful conditions that these animals are forced to live in and undergo within laboratories. An example of a well-organized and broadcasted protest consists of one done in Maryland. This protest was against a biomedical lab using beagles as test subjects. This comes from a Washington, USA news article called "No Need to Kill the Dogs." A protest led by the Humane Society against the killing of these innocent beagles at a biomedical laboratory in Maryland, connected to Rockville and Bethesda. Protests such as these bring public attention to the issue, close to many people's homes. It has also led to public outrage, which further pushes forth bills concerning the issue. The more the public pushes, the more the government will do, and this is such an important thing to realize. Speaking of bills and legislation, let's take a look at some bills that have been pushed to ban animal testing in the U.S. In 2019, the U.S. introduced a Humane Cosmetics Act. This act was introduced in order to place a ban on animal testing for the use of cosmetics. In quotes, the legislation would bring U.S. cosmetic policy in line with 40 countries that have already implemented bans on animal testing and the sale of animal testing cosmetics. This comes from a 2019 Washington Federal Information article. This act would bring the country in line with over 40 other countries that have already made the action to ban animal testing and cosmetics. This is a reason we must push senators to fight for bills such as these. From Sarah Musden, president of the Humane Society Legislation Fund, it is said that 11 states and 44 countries have already brought a ban to animal testing on cosmetics, leaving the United States relatively the only country in North America that is yet to do so. With so many countries having followed this legislation, why should it be impossible for us to do so? A national legislation must be placed in order to protect these animals and uproot these companies partaking in such cruel and violent acts. Acts such as the Humane Cosmetic Act are just a few steps in the right direction, and it is time for the country to get on board with other countries such as the UK and Germany, as well as states as California and Nevada, in banning and creating strict regulations against animal testing. It is not impossible. With this, I plead you to take this information and understand there is a difference you as a person can make. From this information, you now know all sides to animal testing. Not only is there a strong emotional presence, but even science to back up the evidence that these tests are no longer needed, as well as politics to show that it is possible to create and administer bans. Animal testing is a cruel and violent act with unreliable evidence and inconsistent data, and it must be abolished. So again, I ask you to consider the circumstances these animals are in and how undeserving any life is to go through this sort of suffering and pain for such minuscule benefit. Start making a difference in any way you can, whether that is shopping cruelty-free or even joining an animal rights group. Any small benefit can help. No animal deserves to go through such pain, and the banning of animal testing in cosmetics is the future I want to see in the U.S.